everybody, and welcome to this last session of the day, the last session before the big celebration is happening somewhere behind us here in a big room. And I'm very, very happy that you have chosen to share this time here with us today, because we're going to talk about some cool tips and tricks for Visual Studio, right? Productive developers are happy developers, and this is very important stuff. So we want to make sure you have a good time. I know you kind of want to get to that celebration, get some food, get a drink maybe. So let's have a good time, let's have some fun. And if you have any questions, please post them to the usual place online. We got Jim and Vedha sitting over here, and Matt and Andy sitting remotely helping to answer the questions as we go along. And if we have time at the end, we can take some of the bigger questions at the end of the session here. So let's just get to it. All right. So here I have a project. Oh, look at this. Hang on. Oh, you know what it is? Look at all my tool windows. It all looks like a mess here. What happened was that before I plugged in up here, I had my laptop plugged into like a large monitor that's really wide. So I had all this room for tool windows, but now it looks kind of all crammed in. So let me just fix that real quick. There we go. Or, as I like this here, fresh car smell. This is my favorite way to start Visual Studio in the day. Windows minimized, all very, very nice. And I can just go between all these layouts here. All right, here's my wider screen layout. Here's my web layout. And here's my fresh car smell. So this is not a new feature I'm showing you here. I'm doing this with a single keyboard shortcut to move between all these. This is called saved Windows layouts. The reason I want to show you this is because I know we got data on this that you don't use it. So what you do is that you create all your tool windows, you drag them around, you put them in the location you want, maybe multiple monitors, you have Solution Explorer on one side and Test Explorer on the other, or whatever it might be. And then you go to Window and just hit Save Window Layout. When you do that, that gives you a bunch of all your saved layouts. You can give them any name you want, and very easily you can change between them. So that's what I did with all the keyboard shortcuts here. Control-Alt, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many you've got. So a little tip to get started. All right, so this project I got loaded here. It's a web API project, ASP.NET. And it has Swagger, so it renders this UI when I run it in the browser. That's what it looks like. So I can see all my endpoints. But Visual Studio has never really had that ability for me to really quickly get a glance of what are the different endpoints that I have in my app. So if I do my saved window layout for my web workload, see, I don't just have a window layout for each monitor configuration. I have one for the different types of apps I'm building. So when I'm in web mode here, I want to show the new endpoint Explorer. Shows up out here. So this looks pretty much what we saw on the Swagger UI. I get to see all my endpoints here. Oh. I can take this. Let me just drag it up here. There we go. So that's kind of nice, and I can even open all these different these are basically routes, right, my endpoints. I can see what file they belong to, the methods. I can navigate to them by clicking on them, and so on. But what if I want to make an HTTP request to any of these? So let's go down and look at the contact endpoint here. I'm going to right-click, and I can now say generate request. I'm going to click that, and it's going to create an HTTP file, .http. This is a new concept in Visual Studio. It's not a new concept to the world. An extension for VS Code and a few other editors support this format. But what it does, it allows me, in plain text, to send requests. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. So check this out. It creates a variable at the top that points to my local host. And I can just hit the play button. And it will now send an HTTP request and return it right here. So because this is an HTTP file, it's just a text file on disk, I can check this into my source control. So my team members can see how to use my API, or our API. But also I can use it as documentation. Let's say I have an open source project or something like that. This file can now act as documentation on how to use the API. And, oh, let me get my Explorer, I think, back here. Let's do another GET request here. I'll just right-click another one of the endpoints here. This is one that returns for a certain ID. Let's do ID number 2 and hit the execute here. And now we can see we get just that one request, or sorry, that one record back. But I can also make a post. I can make anything here. And you see these green pound signs or hashes. Those are the delimiters between the different requests I'm sending. But I can go in here, and so now I want to do a post request. So I can go in and say, well, content type, application, JSON, all right. And then I just need to give it some JSON. I got some right here. I'm going to copy that in. Oh, I just want to make sure you can see it. Here we go. So I'm going to make a post request to this particular endpoint, and I'm going to pass it in a HTTP header and a request body. And executing that super simply gives me this, just a confirmation back. And if I now get all my records again, we can see that I now have, oh, did I not send it correctly? Maybe not. Ah. Is that right? All right, let's see here. There we go. Thank you, everybody. So now, as I'm building up my HTTP file here, I'm documenting my API. And I'm making something that my whole team can use to test new things, to test the API that we're building. So really, really handy. And what's really cool is, if some of you are using VS Code, some of you are using Visual Studio and whatnot, this file works on all the different editors. They all understand this format. All right. But speaking of testing, what if I want to test something that, or I have a mobile app talking to my API, and it might be a colleague of mine that builds that mobile app, and that colleague wants to test something that I'm doing on my laptop here on the API. How do we take a mobile app from one person's desktop and connect it over to my API on my local host? Well, typically, that's not really been that easy. There are some products out there that can help with that. You have to pay for them. But now, you probably have heard this, we have dev tunnels. And so I can go up here on my play button and go to dev tunnels, and I can create a new tunnel. Let's give it a name. How about build? We can then say, should this be temporary or persistent? Like, how long should we keep this dev tunnel alive? Let's just do temporary. And what about the security of this? Should it be just private, organizational, or public? Let's do public. So now I've created a tunnel, and I'm going to, here's a confirmation. You've created a tunnel. Yes, thank you. So now if I run the app again, Control F5, it's going to spin up that same Swagger UI as before. But this time, it's going to show me a confirmation. You are about to connect to a developer tunnel and then some sort of URL. And we can see I get the exact same UI here, but it's no longer localhost. It's this other thing. And just to prove that I'm not cheating here, if you want to, You can point your camera at that QR code right there and see if you can hit this, because remember, we did a public endpoint. So you should see the exact same thing on your mobile device. OK. I'm going to just grab this URL, and I can go back to my HTTP file and paste it in right here. OK. So now I changed my URL, and if I hit the button here, I'm now creating a request toward the public API. And it works just fine, right? Because I have a dev tunnel that basically connects the public internet with my local host right here. So if I build webhooks, or if I build APIs for mobile apps, or if I have any other scenario where I need someone else or some other system to connect to my machine, do I want to test, maybe I want to test whatever website I'm working on my phone to see if it renders correctly on a mobile device, I can now do that super easily. And not only is it easy, it's free. So that's very, very nice. All right. So that was the endpoints, the web server endpoints. But what about the code that generated them? So here they are. This is what it looks like. Web API. This is what Web API looks like nowadays. And I don't necessarily know how this works. I remember back in .NET Framework with MVC. And so this looks a little bit different to me than I'm used to. And you probably know this when you're working with APIs that you don't know if you're using a new NuGet package that you haven't used before. You don't know how to use that API that it provides. Or if you're new to a team, you don't know how that team writes their code, right? So if we look at this code here, there's something called group.mapPost right here. I'm not sure what that means. So check this out. If I just hover over this API, OK, I got to be faster. Look at the bottom. I'm sorry, I can't scroll this. But at the bottom, it says GitHub examples and documentation. I'm holding the mouse over the method called mapPost, OK? This is an API method. So I'm now going to click this, and it opens up a new window right here. I'm going to zoom in. Just check the scroll bar. This is a long list of examples of other apps using this API in all sorts of different kinds of ways. There's really a lot here. I can learn a lot by doing this. Like, what did I have to do before? I had to go read documentation, right? Well, if there was documentation. But now I get to see how people are actually using it right here. And it's so clever that it even knows about the different overloads for this particular method. And it can give me all these examples. What's really helpful to me here, what I really think is really cool about this direction is, first of all, in order to provide relevant examples, the AI engine in Visual Studio understands the context that my code is in. So when I hover over something, it understands what that code is there for and can therefore give me relevant examples. But last year, a survey came out. I think this is even more interesting. A survey came out that found that the average developer codes for 52 minutes per day. The rest of the time goes with reading code, reading documentation, code reviews, email, meetings, and so on. So all the time we spent reading documentation, wouldn't that be nice if we can kind of get that back and we can code some more? So instead of 52 minutes, we can get 58 or even more. And that's what this helps me with. This has saved me several times already. I've used this for a couple of months now in our internal builds, and it's now all available here to everybody. So I'm very excited for that one. All right, let's add a new folder to this project. So you know how you add a folder. You right-click, go down to Add, New Folder, right? That's how we do it. So recently we added a new thing that instead of doing that, I can do Add New Item. But you know, Add New Item, let's do the keyboard shortcut. What's the shortcut for Add New Item? Shift F2, OK. There's someone here that knows what I'm about to show. It's Control-Shift-A, Add New Item. And we get this little thing up now. This doesn't look like that Add New Item thing. The Add New Item thing looks like this. That's what I'm looking for normally, right? But it now has this compact view. And so if I want to do a folder, let's call it folder, I'm just going to end it with a slash. And hit Enter. And immediately, that was created there. OK? So oh. All right, I'll take it. Thank you. So what this Control-Shift-A does, it always gets you back to the view you used before. Did you use the compact view or the full view? But if you're like me, I always want the compact view first, regardless of whether or not I used the full view earlier. And so what someone was saying, Shift F2 always gets you to the compact view, regardless. And from here, I can do some other cool things. I can create, what if I create two files? foo.cs followed by ibar.cs. So now, I got two files. Super easy. Well, what if I want to create a subfolder or a file inside a subfolder that doesn't exist? I can do subfolder/bas.cs. And now I have that file. So I can comma separate. I can create subfolders. I can create folders super easily here. I'm very excited for this feature. This was one of the highest voted for extensions that existed that you voted for us to put in the box. So it's finally here, and I love it. But how smart is this thing? So this was the Bas class. Here's the foo class. It's a class. How does it know it's a class? I just gave it a file name. Well, because it maps to the templates that was in that big view, the old Add New Item dialog, we have all those templates. It is clever enough to map file extensions to what is probably the most likely template that you want, in this case, a class. But what about that ibar file that we did? It's an interface. Yes, exactly. Because naming convention, right? ibar. Makes sense. So this thing is pretty clever, and that's cool. I want to show you something else that's really clever. This is another thing that I think it was until we added this, no more than, I think, 2 weeks ago, the second highest voted feature that we add. And it goes like this. What is the difference between foo.cs and ibar.cs? Or in another way, how do I find out what the difference is? Well, now I can right-click one, and I can compare it with any file on disk, or I can select this for compare. So now I take ibar, right-click that, and can say, compare with foo.cs, because that was the one I just selected. And doing that gives me the diff view. Yeah, finally. Sorry for the wait. It's now here. And this is just the first feature we have of this. We're going to look at much more comparison between files and clipboards and all sorts of things that have to do with file comparison and diffing going forward. This is the first one that landed, and it's in the latest preview release. All right. I'm going to shift over here to a different project, different instance of Visual Studio. Here I have a bigger project loader. I think it's 2 projects actually in this solution. And I got a bunch of stuff open here. You know, I don't even know how many files I got open. So I'm just going to start by clicking up here next to the tabs and say, show tabs in multiple rows. Oh, yeah, thank you. So now I can actually see all the tabs that are open. But I just opened this project, or this solution, rather. And you know, if I'm working on something, if I'm working on a solution, I'm working on a task, and I'm not finished with the task, but I have to go home, you know, in the afternoon, I'm not closing Visual Studio. I leave it in that state it is in, so that when I come in the next morning, I can continue where I left off. But for all the times when I don't need to continue where I left off, let's say I'm done with the task of the day, I probably close Visual Studio. And then when I start Visual Studio again in the morning, and I open my solution, I don't want this. I don't want it to open to the state I was in yesterday. So this might not be true for you. This is me, okay? I don't want this because I want the fresh car smell. This is not fresh car smell. It has everything open, and notice Solution Explorer. Everything is expanded, okay? So what happens is when I open this solution and Visual Studio then says, oh, let me hydrate the state that this solution was in the last time it was worked on from disk into memory, and then on the UI thread, expand all the nodes in Solution Explorer. That means nothing else can happen. We can't paint anything else on the screen at that point while that runs. And then we're going to open some C# files, which means we have to load all of Roslyn, we have to load the language services, the colorizers, all those things. Who says I'm even going to open a C# file? That might not be what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to go to Tools Options. And under Project and Solutions, there are 2 checkboxes that are there unless we remove them. One of them is called Reopen Documents on Solution Load. And the next one is Restore Solution Explorer Project Hierarchy State on Solution Load. That's a mouthful. I'm going to remove that too. And click OK. So let me close this solution. And I'm going to open it again. OK, 1, 2, 3, click. And there it is. So very, very fast solution load here, because no state was hydrated by reading a file on disk into memory onto the UI thread. Okay? And fresh car. This is wonderful. All right. I got 2 quick ones to go. Notice the top, it has like this orange banner. If I go back to the other solution, it had a green banner. What's this about? Well, I'm using an extension here. And I want to mention this, not because this extension is particularly awesome, which it happens to be particularly awesome, but because there are so many cool extensions out there. And I want to make sure that you know about that we have extensions. I think you need to be reminded sometimes that there are thousands, literally thousands of extensions that can help us be more productive. And this one is called Solution Colors. And it allows me to give any color to any solution, including if I'm working on the same solution in 2 different instances of Visual Studio, but different branches. They can have different colors, because I can sometimes have a hard time differentiating between the different open instances of Visual Studio I got. And check this out. It even puts that color down here in the Windows jump list or taskbar. So I can very easily navigate between the 2. All right. So the last thing I want to show you, I have to be fast here, is code cleanup and code cleanup profiles. So again, it is not the newest of features, but I know that you're not using it, okay? So I want to draw your attention to this. This is cool. This little thing down here that looks like a duster or broom or something, It's called Code Cleanup. And I can configure Code Cleanup into 2 profiles. By default, it just has a few fixes included. But I can take all the available ones, and we got a lot now. I'm going to hold down Shift so that I can select multiple here. Move that up. Click OK. So now, what I'm doing is that I'm applying all my coding standards that I have configured either in my settings under Tools Options, or if I'm a team, I probably have an editor config file. So wherever I get my coding standards and code styles from, I can have Visual Studio apply this super easily. So let's take this file as an example. I can now hit Control-KE, and my entire team's coding standards are now applied really, really quickly. So about 20% of code reviews go to talking about code standards and coding styles. And so now we can get that time back, because I can do that very easily here. I can even set it up so it happens automatically on save. Okay? I don't even have to invoke this manually. And speaking of getting ready for code review, we have some brand new features in Visual Studio 2022 for working with Git. And to demo some of that, I want to invite my friend Jessie on stage to show some of the really, really cool and new things that we have available. Jessie?
All right. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie, and I'm the product manager for the version control team in Visual Studio. We know that you care a lot about productivity, and we want to boost that productivity while you're using Git. So my goal is to show you how we've made version control easy and efficient by allowing you to do more in the IDE and minimize distractions that take you out. So to set the stage for the demo, we've made some changes, and I've already opened the Git Changes window here. So let me make that a little bit bigger. I've got some changes in my resize file and my enum class. And I'm going to start preparing my commit. So there are 2 GitHub issues that I care about in this scenario. The first one is actually tracking the work that I'm doing on this project. And the second one, I was tagged in by a colleague because they thought it was relevant to my work. So as I start typing my commit, I'm going to use the closes keyword. When I complete this pull request, it's going to go ahead and close that issue for me, so I don't have to worry about it. That's nothing new. But then I want to reference my GitHub issue. And what you would need to do is go out into the browser, copy-paste that issue ID, or look up and find exactly what you were looking for. But if you had a good idea of the title or the name of that one, you can use our issue search. So if I type the hash button, I get that list of all of my recent issues that I've been tagged on. I can use keyword search to narrow down my results, and I can find exactly what I'm looking for without leaving Visual Studio. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. The other issue that I wanted to reference, let me do that quickly. And I'll use the button here, which does the same exact thing. Let me narrow that down, grab that. And you can see that both of these items were added to my related items section. And if I wanted more context, I can right-click and open these directly in the browser. So I'm realizing this is my last commit that I want to make before completing my pull request. So just to avoid any surprises happening in the pipeline, I'm going to go ahead and rebuild my solution. Now, we've all been there where a build starts, and it might take a while to run. We might be tempted to leave Visual Studio, go check Teams, or catch up on email. And we heard that it's a blocker to not be able to do your Git operations. So we've enabled staging and then committing all while the build is running, so I can continue doing my Git flow while the build is still going on, and you can see that happening below. All right. Let's look at my Git repository window. I've got some updates in there that I want to share. So I've clicked on the View All Commits button. That's my preferred way, easiest way to get there. And I want to draw your attention. The graph here is nothing new, but we did add some UI enhancements to aid in readability. And what I want to show is the multi-branch graph that we've created. So I mentioned that I'm creating a pull request, and I'm going to do that against the develop branch. So let me just click on this eye icon and visualize that. And now I can see exactly how my commits stack up between my branches, whereas before, I'd have to wait till I made my pull request and get that view in the web. So now I'm all prepared to create my PR right away. Awesome. Another great thing about the multi-branch graph is that it makes me really confident when I'm performing complex Git operations. Now, if I was asked to cherry pick a bug fix for a branch that I worked on a while ago, I'd be fumbling between Stack Overflow, trying to find the right command, and then the right commit ID so that I didn't make a mistake and mess up my repo. So with the multi-branch graph, I can just visualize that bug fix branch. Let me scroll to it really quick. And then I can right-click here. And then if I want to make doubly sure that this is the right change, I can double-check that in my commit details. And now that I'm confident, I'll go ahead and just click cherry pick. I've got the banner to let me know that was successful. Then I can scroll back to the top of my feature branch and just ensure that that's exactly the right bug fix I wanted to apply. And that was so much easier than having to go track down the right command to do that. Cool. So you figured out all of the commits that you wanted to add to this PR. The build ran successfully. And now you're ready for that last step, which is creating your pull request. So I'm pushing my changes. And I'm greeted with that banner that lets me know that it was successful. And then you might be familiar with this link. Today, if you tried it out and clicked on that link, it would take you out into GitHub.com or Azure DevOps or wherever you were creating that pull request in the web. But we heard from you all that it's pretty silly to be able to complete 90% of your workflow in Visual Studio and then have to leave to do the last 10%. So I'm excited to share the new pull request view in Visual Studio, which allows me to finish creating that right in the IDE. So it's got everything that you might want. I'll go ahead and quickly create my pull request. It's not going to be terribly descriptive or interesting, but you guys are going to do much better than I am. And then I've got that same issue search available here, and I can go ahead and create that pull request and see it, if I refresh, available on GitHub right there. So these are all the features that I wanted to share in the time I had today, but they're only a fraction of the updates that we've made. Make sure that you're downloading the latest preview of Visual Studio and engage with us on developer community. These were all different requests that came from you all, and it's what allows us to make such awesome features. So I'll give it back to Mads, but enjoy the rest of your build.
Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, that's some good stuff. And everything you saw here so far is currently available, except for the last PR, the pull request thing. It's coming very soon, so during the summer here, or winter if you're on the southern hemisphere, I guess, but soon, let's say. Other things we talked a lot about, like things that you're requesting us to put into Visual Studio, new features, all this stuff. And the thing that comes up all the time, of course, is performance. And it's hard to demonstrate performance in a setting like this, so I just want to make sure I had a slide to let you know that it's something we actively work on. We have a lot of engineers that work on this. It's their full-time job, and we have made some great strides. 17.5 came in, is the version of Visual Studio 2022 that we shipped in February. It had a bunch of improvements. If you're a .NET developer, check out the new build acceleration if you haven't already. You're going to cut your build times by 80%. It's like a huge win. There's a whole lot of other things. Solution load is 8 times faster if you have some of those big solutions that really need that extra boost. Solution close, which is interestingly enough, is actually a thing. Who thought that would matter? But it does, and it's now faster. And so is the profiler. I want to call out the profiler for 2 reasons. One is, you're not using it. And it's fantastic. It lets you find performance issues, hot paths, reliability issues, very, very easily directly in Visual Studio. It instruments your running app, and it can give you all those answers. And we've been making so many updates to it that it's better than ever, and it really can answer those hard questions about performance and reliability. And it now generates the results 3.5 times faster. For me, that has actually meant I can make it part of my inner loop. So when I write Visual Studio extensions, for instance, I can run the profiler just as I would like run my debugger. Because it's now so fast, it's not something I have to think of doing later on. It's just something that's part of my inner loop, and it makes my code stronger. All right, so all this stuff is, and of course, we continue work on performance. So 17.6 we released a week ago. 17.7 Preview 1 has even more stuff. So go check out the latest and greatest 17.6 if you're on the release channel. If you're on the preview channel, get 17.7. And the extension I showed you was called Solution Colors, if that has any interest. All right, so 3 weeks ago, I think, Dante, something like that, we had a blog post coming out about a topic that turned out to be really interesting to all of you. And so we thought, we can't do build without showing you and talking about this particular subject. And for that, I want to invite my friend Dante on stage to do exactly that. Dante?
Thanks, Matt. So my name's Dante Gagne. I'm one of the product managers on Visual Studio, and I'm in charge of the UI refresh. So as Mads mentioned, we published a blog post about the UI refresh that we've been working on. And yeah, I wanted to come up here and show a little bit about what we're doing. So I'll go ahead and show you what we're looking at. And basically, if you've been looking at Visual Studio and saying to yourself, you know, this looks like a UI that was designed like a decade ago, and the reason is because for the most part it has been. It's been a while since we've had a new refresh, and we decided it's time to do a new one. And this isn't something that we take on lightly, mostly because the UI in Visual Studio, this is something that affects every single one of us. It's something that we're going to be looking at every second of every hour that we work on Visual Studio. And that's more than the 52 minutes we spend coding. It's really all your time is going to be spent on it. So we want to make sure we get it right. We want to spend the time and make sure that it's going to be the UI that it's going to be more comfortable, and it's going to be something that we're going to enjoy working in. And our guidance is we want to make it the most accessible and approachable UI that we've ever had. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the design principles. I'm going to encourage you, go up to aka.ms/vsfluent. That's the blog post that we put up there. And it's got all of the principles and everything. But what we're doing this time, we really want to work with our community. We want to work with you to make sure that this is the UI that we're ready to work with. Some folks who have been working with Visual Studio for a while might remember some of the UI that wasn't necessarily accepted quite so well, and we want to make sure that this time it is what we want. And let me show you what I'm talking about here. What I'm showing on the screen now, the top toolbar is the toolbar that you've got right now in Visual Studio. If you've got 17.6 or any of the more recent ones, that's what you've got. And below that is one of the toolbars that we showed in that blog post. This conforms with some of the web content accessibility guidelines of larger controls that make it easier, say, for people with a motor disability to be able to click on those controls and make sure that they're not misclicking. Larger controls reduce cognitive load, make it a little bit easier for people to use. A lot of things like that that adhere to the Fluent UI design guidelines, a whole bunch of other things like that. But the feedback we immediately got from our developer community is it's a little bit too big. So we went back and said, you know, based on the guidelines that we're working with, and based on the community guidelines, or the community feedback that we're getting, can we take all of that into account? And below that, I'm showing the next generation mock-ups that we're working with. So we're iterating on that feedback, and we're iterating on our design principles, and we're moving towards a UI design that we feel is going to be more in line with what we're trying to reach that accessible and approachability, and at the same time taking into account what our community, what our developers, folks like yourself, what's more important to you. And that's how we're approaching this UI refresh. We want to make something that is going to be what we are going to be spending a lot of our time doing in the days and years to come. Here's another example, the document tabs. These ones, again, the top one is the document tabs that you're used to, and the one below that is the one that we showed in the blog post, and immediately we heard people say, don't take any room from the coding window. Please don't take any room from the coding window. Okay, what can we do with that one? How can we change the things? And the bottom one was showing one that took quite a bit less room from the coding window. And in fact, one of my designers is showing me a new mock-up that she was just working on that actually gave 1 or 2 more pixels to the coding window, but still adhered to those design principles that we're working with. And all of these things that we're doing are coming from feedback from the community. Now, I've already had a couple people asking me, when are we going to get a chance to look at this? And the answer is, I don't know right now, because we're not ready to make this available in the previews until we're making sure that we're listening to the feedback from the community and we're taking that all into account. We've got time. We're not in a rush to put this out because we want to be very deliberate for this refresh before we're rolling it out. So we don't have a timeline on it. We want to take our time and we want to get this right. And the way we get that right is with engagement with y'all and getting y'all into the conversation. So I do want to encourage folks, once again, aka.ms/VSFluent. That's the blog post. And we're going to continue to engage at VSFluent. We're going to continue to be working with developer community. I know Mads and Jessie both mentioned that as well, that we're working with the community, and we're really serious about that with the UI refresh here. Please join in the conversation, and we're going to continue to iterate on that with everybody there. So with that, I look forward to talking with folks more about it, and I'll hand it back to Mads. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dante. All right, so we are at the end of this session, and I want to just take a moment and say thank you so much for coming here. I know it's just before the celebration, and you're probably thinking, when does he shut up so I can go stand in line? I understand. But before I let you go, I just want to say it's been a privilege to be here on stage with these 2 fine people representing the Visual Studio team and show you some .NET things, some Visual Studio things. And as you know, there's a bunch of different sessions here at Build about Azure and all sorts of different topics. And if you want more Visual Studio and .NET, it is super important that you tell us. And the way you tell us is to fill in one of these session surveys. Like, give us a good rating here. In the comments, let us know you want more Visual Studio and .NET for future conferences, whether it's Build, Ignite, or whatever it might be. The powers that be will listen to that stuff, so please help us out and cast your vote, so to say. Thank you so much, and see you in celebration.